I heard them both.
So what do you make of this in the current situation in Israel?
Well, it actually leads up perfect to the things that I want to say. And I'll start from the beginning as much as you can go, the pre-COVID days here in the past 2 years. What's imperative to understanding of how all that's happened in the past 2 years happened in Israel first is to first understand the backdrop of Israel prior to COVID-19. This is a country that not only has been in a state of emergency since its modern inception, having experienced war after war and regular attack on every front, but one that's given of itself husbands, sons, and daughters to keep this homeland intact. Not only is this country used to snapping into action when duty and generals call, there's a unique Jewish experience of having been persecuted throughout history and country, culminating in the systematic annihilation of 6 million Jewish souls and the millions of others deemed undesirable. So you have with Israel the mixture of the historical, ideological, theological, spiritual, and actual lived hope and trust that's placed in our government to finally be in a supposed safe space for the Jewish nation to flourish without prejudice. At least that was the plan as far as the flesh and blood body of this new old state understood it. We, the people of Israel, bought the brochure. We gave of ourselves and made sacrifices for a collective that's been mined and abused by its government. The Jewish people have historically served the world as the canary in the coal mine. We act as a reflection. When it's bad with and within us, that's a sign of where there's brokenness in the world. We know and have seen repeatedly whatever adversity that starts with the Jewish people never ends with them, but is a fire that spreads to consume all of us. And there's a good reason that all eyes are on Jerusalem. We're not in that coal mine alone. And we, the people of this earth, do have an opportunity now in the face of the profound losses to see each other without the nudging and blinders and guidelines that powers that be would have us believe about one another. So with the background of some of the harshest lockdowns to date, at least at the time, the first which tethered us to 100 meters from the home, only one of 3 countries to enforce outdoor mask mandates, we were also the first, one of the few to shut down our airports and create an open-air ghetto. And security bracelets were on offer to rent to surveil the movement of the returned traveler instead of the police. So you have this unique background of trust in government and essentially captured audience of citizens who receives its equally captured news and is the only one to do so in Hebrew. In the most exquisite of betrayals, then Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, in December 2020, informed, and I do mean informed, the country on national television that we would all be vaccinated by March. And then he proceeded to do all in his power to make good on that declaration. So what later followed was the revelation that there was an already signed and sealed contract between Pfizer and Israel. Pfizer, as we know, is an unconscionable, multiple times convicted felon of a pharmaceutical company whose roots branch back to Wyeth, who was once American Home Products, which was a subsidiary of Sterling, whereas Sterling and Bayer bought into one another's companies. And of course, Bayer was originally IG Farben of Auschwitz. Pfizer had too chosen this people once again for its thorough and digitized health records on its citizens reaching back decades, its small, near hermetically sealed environment, and it's eager to please government and medical officials. The contract, of course, was made without any prior notification, public discourse, or put to any sort of vote, as one would expect from alleged democracy. To this day, only a heavily redacted version of this contract has ever been shown to the public, one where we paid some 2.5 times the price per vial than do other countries, and allegedly leaves us beholden to Pfizer's penalty clauses, restrictions, and relative exclusivity. In a further mockery of democracy, the Corona Committee minutes, those which determine the ever-changing policy we continue to be subjected to, have been withheld from the public and classified as top secret in a 30-year Confidentiality Act. The state was quoted as saying, quote, "The public's right to know isn't absolute." The Corona Committee recently made headlines again as it was revealed that on a panel of some 90 experts, less than half were doctors, 16 lacked any relevant clinical experience. Another 15 were a combination of senior clerks in healthcare, spokesmen, veterinarians, and communication researchers. But what's interesting is the 26 remaining identities, nearly a third, who continue to be concealed because of their positions in security and bioresearch. What ensued with the operation to inject as many Israelis en masse as possible with this novel technology for the first time ever was not only a breach of the Nuremberg codes that were a resultant of the torture of human testing on this very people, but irrefutably violated the most basic tenets of first do no harm and informed consent. Informed consent is, maybe was, the foundation of modern medicine. It's the answer to the unimpeded atrocities of the Holocaust and the conclusion of the Nuremberg trials and their subsequent codification. Informed consent is defined as, I quote, the process in which a healthcare provider educates a patient about the risks, benefits, and alternatives of a given procedure or intervention and originates from the patient's right to direct what happens to their body. The patient must be competent to make a voluntary decision, and the documentation of the process is an essential element. Informed consent is both an ethical and legal obligation of medical practitioners. Israelis were not given informed consent. They were without inquiry of medical background or explanation of the gene treatment they were about to receive, injected and sat for 15 minutes at best before sent on their way. No list of potential side effects were given to look out for, nor any healthcare provider number was offered to call in case something should go amiss post-shot. Injections were given at breakneck speed, plummeting through the population from the elderly to within weeks to the next and the next down the allotted age range. And in reality, anyone accompanying someone older was often permitted to receive the jab as well, so it wouldn't go to waste at the end of the day. Israelis were barraged from the outset with a campaign of fear, coercion, threats, and incitement that only worsened with the change of government to PM Naftali Bennett, who's been quoted with such gems as when echoing US President Biden, proclaiming his tolerance for the unvaccinated has run out. Or on another occasion, how he wanted parents to fight among themselves into compliance. He's asked neighbor to encourage neighbor to do their civic duty. And he's breached the sanctity of the parent-child relationship several times, going onto national television, directly addressing our youth to go and get jabbed, lest he be forced to restrict their summer fun. And that was just within the first weeks and months of his premiership. The aggressive marketing of the old cult motto, safe and effective, included even outright lies, like in February 2021, when Netanyahu made a video that directly stated the shot was FDA approved, well before that dubious approval was actually given. And this perpetual media campaign assaulted the singular facts we knew to be true throughout the entirety of Corona narrative, which is that here, as it with most infections, the elderly and those with comorbidity are disproportionately at risk, while the young have none. So in crude fashion, we saw on repeat in the days prior to the next targeted age group, the media would carpet bomb channels with overnight and first time ever frenzied stories of hospitalizations and dire health consequences, first to pregnant women, then later for 16-year-old youth, then 12-year-olds, and then passing another point of no return to our 5-year-old children. Healthy young kids who may have already had and recovered from a COVID infection in the full year's time prior, with the whole of their lives ahead of them, were made to believe they had to rush and take a still in its trial technology into their cellular system without a single existing long-term long-term safety data. No system was initially installed to record post-adverse events. No system was initially installed to record adverse events post-shot. And only recently and rather belatedly has such a database been set up, and to this day its existence is all but unknown to the public at large. It's only been with the heroic efforts of Nakim.org, Israel's People Committee, and Avital Livni's Testimonials Project that any chinks in Israel's happily ever after narrative were even seen. In fact, and now rather infamously, when the Ministry of Health posted on Facebook that the booster seemed to be altogether safe and effective, they received upwards of 27,000 comments from Israelis describing catastrophic reports of the harm or death incurred post-injection to themselves, friends, and relatives relatives, some of them posting documentation to prove it. And the Ministry of Health fully panicked, disabled translation into English, and began deleting those comments, claiming they were foul language. But many were saved in any case on screenshots, which is only one aspect of the cover-up of data. We ourselves submitted a FOIA last March inquiring how many people had died post-shot. And the Ministry of Health's reply was that they did not know. There was not only no chance of recording the deluge of side effects that were all too real, having received no informed consent, there was no understanding to the average citizen of any adverse reactions having correlated to the jab taken in the previous days, weeks, and months. And further, for those who did understand what had happened to them, the culture of incitement was so great, people genuinely feared for their relationships and livelihood should they openly call the narrative into account. I would say that in order to convince the rest of the world to roll up its collective sleeve, no knowledge of harm incurred ever could reach the public, which have left Israel's people entirely gaslit, having been subjected to human testing on one hand and denied recourse or even acknowledgement of that damage done on the other, damage that will continue to be revealed for years to come. In fact, if you look at the parts of the Pfizer-Israel contract that are visible, you will see the express goals of the research were not whatsoever to discover any safety signals or lack thereof, but as an epidemiological endeavor to test a supposed herd immunity. And of course, the concept of herd immunity here is a complete false flag. It was well known to Pfizer, Moderna, Fauci, the WHO's chief scientist, and the US Surgeon General, just to name a few. This technology never had the capability to stop transmission. And as Netanyahu bought 60 million doses at the very onset for this only 9 million person population, one might conjecture he was well aware of this too. As we've yelled from the beginning, 4 doses per person, but even I didn't think it would be within only 1 year's time. With the month of January 2022 clocking more positive test results than the entirety of 2021 combined, we could probably conclude that this has been a colossal failure and close up shop. Instead, there is an open recommendation for a mind-bending 4th dose to the general population 16 years and up. This 4th dose was given to Israelis without FDA authorization or even our own completed studies in Sheba Hospital. Those Sheba Hospital studies, in fact, began only after the 4th dose rollout was initiated. And it was PM Naftali Bennett to go on television and assure us it was perfectly safe to take dose number 4 of this 3 times failed product. Bennett made his position absolutely clear when he admonished even the Ministry of Health in charges for taking too long to begin that 4th rollout. And as he stated in Davos only a few weeks ago, his method is to act fast or you might lose out. Borla was just recently, to our great embarrassment, awarded Israel's Genesis Award. And in that video announcement, in proper propagandist fashion, he's actually praised for his savvy at not taking FDA funding so that he could shorten and circumvent the bureaucracy in place for authorization. And in a display that we've entered a realm so lawless and without reason, Israel's government is again in talks with Pfizer to sign its citizens up for an Omicron vaccine trial. This while we're still beholden to the current trial that we're currently being tested upon. This, though even mainstream media has reported that more than half of Israel's population has had and recovered from Omicron. And an absurdity that words do not suffice, not to speak of the exponentially increased risk to inject an already recovered body. And still, school children and employees are forced to pay out of pocket for several times weekly antigen tests that have been openly admitted by health officials to be exceedingly inaccurate. And that's quite a statement compared to the potential 97% false positive PCR tests. These tests, which continue to modify behavior and hold the country hostage to enter schools, workspaces, a lengthy list of cultural activities, and our departure or return to the country depending on the rules of the day. And masks, that ubiquitous requirement, but most sinister of them all, are still required for even young children indoors. And it's a dark cloud that's descended since we covered the light of expression in our faces. It should be noted that it's all but impossible to receive an exemption. I've not heard of a single person, regardless of pre-existing condition, be successful at receiving one. One mother turned to me for help for her son who had suffered 2 blood clots unrelated to the jab, and still no doctor dared to write him one. Instead, they offer an AstraZeneca shot, the very one banned in 18 different countries. While the world was well aware, and it was openly remarked alongside Burla, the BBC, and Bibi Netanyahu that the people of Israel were in fact the world's laboratory, here on the ground it remained taboo to say so. But the experiment was not only on our physical bodies, but that of a social experiment on this small, interdependent nation with the overnight installation of the Third Reich-originated medical apartheid health pass. This green pass, the population, which up to this point, and it's only increased since, was subjected to such overwhelming dissonance of morning to night, night to day, changing regulations and restrictions, one did not know what was law and what was only recommendation. Israelis believed this green pass was legislated and summarily disinvited friends and family home, restricted the entry to hospital, university, cultural event, health clinic, and of course, in the terrific tumbling of For Your Health, threatened some people to not allow life-saving injuries if they were unjabbed. This, even though our health minister, Nitzan Horowitz, was literally caught on camera saying it had no epidemiological value. And as was true already at dose 3, 4 maniacal shots in were all under-vaccinated. A study was done by the Rupin Academy College that showed 58% of people took this injection for which they knew nothing about, had no medical indication for, didn't personally feel they need, only because of the green pass. 1 in 4 did so to keep their jobs, and a whopping 78% of newly dubbed anti-vaxxers have been vaccinated by most other and true vaccines. It's a story of separation of newborns from mothers, of the elderly from the family that keep their lives worth living, one that destroyed the trust between doctor and patient, co-workers and friends, and saw new recruited soldiers terrorized in the middle of the night and in the mess hall, aggressively coerced to receive this jab with a stick of green pass. And though we ate next to, prayed next to, exercised next to these same people for the entire year prior, the introduction of this gene therapy jab to the staggering majority of this population did nothing to ease the fear of the injection, did nothing to ease the fear of this infection, but rather solidified it as a permanent part of life. And it's the small crimes and quiet atrocities as they pile up from place to place that have systematically dismantled the trust, hope, and optimism that binds this country together. The green pass is like a wet cloth left in the laundry pile that's created a rot from within, whose damage, like that of the shot, continues to unfold. My first experience of understanding the power of psychological warfare, however aware one attempts to be, has been surrounding the societal horror that is this green pass, as it was renamed, canceled, and reinstated. The green pass is set again to be suspended in the coming days. But it's an entirely meaningless gesture, as the Nazi-originated Enabling Act has only weeks ago been renewed in our Knesset until the end of 2022. And it gives the ruling government power to remove God-given fundamental and civil liberties with the need only to state fear of the coronavirus. In February of last year, legislation was made to allow the sharing of medical data with local municipalities and authorities. That was later retracted. But in reality, 97% of all requests by public bodies to receive data about private citizens was granted. The Israeli government gave private, sensitive information about millions of its citizens to over 250 local and other government agencies. That includes names and addresses of the ill or quarantined, test results, contact tracing, and information about vaccination status, all given without the person's knowledge or, of course, their consent. Here in Israel, as we watch surveillance system continuously placed in a blanket infrastructure across country, and as we hear of countless citizens targeted with illegal spyware, we find that we have already lost our privacy. And as our ability to withdraw cash or transfer money above small amounts without express permission is already limited, we know we are at present not in control of our possessions. So too with the signing of the Nimbus project. The Nimbus project is a massive 7-year project that will replace the data management infrastructure of government ministries and the IDF. One that will see the migration of the entirety of Israel's non-classified data and computerized applications, everything from government and military payrolls to welfare payments to government pensions, as well as the medical files, personal and corporate tax returns of private Israeli citizens. Instead of on previous dozens of decentralized locations, it will be all in one basket in the cloud of Mordor conglomerates, Amazon and Google. And with the open bragging that the World Economic Forum has infiltrated governments worldwide, we know that outside interests have direct influence over our sovereign nations. We know that databases will continue to grow as they collect our medical information on digital passports, that 100 billion pictures are already ready for facial recognition of every person on the planet, and that our every click and like and real life response to the social media platform algorithm leaves no aspect of the human experience too small to be collected in construction of its digital twin. This is the demolition of our world as we've known it. And while we seem to be marching toward it as if a fait accompli, I think that's one due more to images predetermined by Hollywood than God. And those in power seek to access and control ever more essential sources of life and its regenerative cycles. With a broken promise of never again, we picked up the thread of the past and find ourselves barreling down the path of destruction that will come not only to harm the whole of humanity, but to all things creeping and crawling, green and unfurling, organic, fertile life. Those of us bearing witness to these changes across the globe do so with gratitude for having the eyes to see the changes taking place. That gratitude comes equally with obligation to do all within the resources of our thoughts, actions, and will to see the continuation of creation and the human species 1.0. For the world where we maintain the sanctities of the human experience, such as the relationship between mother, father, and child, the ultimate self-determination of body, the quiet privacy of one's own mind, the sacred communion with nature and another human soul, and a world of dynamic free choice and opportunity to learn and change and do better. It's one that is yet just still within our grasp, if only we decide to do so en masse. For humans, with our inherent and ever-present flaws, can yet be an exquisite representation of our source in God. Thank you.
Thank you, Alana. Has anyone in Israel connected the dots? Has anyone seen or even noticed that it all started in Germany again with a professor who invented the PCR test on which everything, including the vaccines, are based? Has anyone seen that the vaccine, the original vaccine, BioNTech, the technology, was again invented in Germany?
I think that the activists who are wide awake are 100% clear of the parallel. Where you have the rest, you have a very clear divide, I would say, where the rest of people, it's absolutely taboo to even say so. Certainly, I myself never made any comparisons with the Holocaust or any of those things until this time, which is actually the right time to do so. Because by doing so, you raise up that the memory of those martyred. To ignore it is literally to cause a second death. So I would say that with the injection of the 5-year-olds, with the fourth dose, they played their hand too far, and they lost a lot. They lost their audience.
Mm-hmm. So what is next? Are people beginning to understand that there's something wrong, or is the majority of the population in Israel still in line with the government, despite all the side effects, which, as it seems from what you're saying, most people don't seem to make the connection with the vaccinations?
Well, I would say that the relentless testing I think even Bennett said this when he was at Davos. He said, well, of course we had so many positive test results. 460,000 people are testing daily. So they pushed people too far, even 2 years in. Again, that was my point, was to say how difficult it is to accept that our government, specifically this government, would want to harm us. But there is, like Professor Desmond talks about, you have the people on this side, the people on this side, and then you have that collection of people in the middle who are angry. They're angry. They understand that a lot's been taken from them. Yeah.
Hi, Alana. Thank you so much for your evidence. You've given us a good insight as to what is currently happening in Israel. You've mentioned a few very important points, and I want us to focus now specifically on the Pfizer contract. You have mentioned that the larger part, or quite an extensive part, of that contract between Pfizer and the Israeli government has never been released to the public. Can you once more just tell the jury as to what was the specific reason as to why the public was not invited, or basically the government not taking the public into their trust and actually say, but this is the contract that we have signed? Because obviously you've also given evidence where your government also made a very, and I will actually say a very bizarre statement, and that is that the public's right to know is not absolute. Can you just explain that to us?
Well, because what I would say is, because we were the testing ground, there was no pretense of choice. Eventually, other countries got there, where you went from, please come and get this jab, please come and get the jab, you better come and get this jab. That came later. Here, like I said, the contract was already signed. It was already a signed, ready to happen deal, and Netanyahu just announced it. And then and keeping along with that inability to have any informed consent or any say whatsoever. Again, the contract was heavily redacted, and the Corona Committee minutes obscured and by doing so, classified as top secret for 30 years. 30-year Confidentiality Act.
That's extremely long itself. I mean, I'm specifically thinking that if you're talking about 30 years, that the public will not know, but we're talking about the public now currently being injected with a substance, correctly pointed out, where they don't even, and they can't give informed consent itself. What I want to find out from you, and you have actually also mentioned FOIA applications. Is there any FOIA applications that is still in the pipeline from organizations that you are involved with, or other organizations in relation to really getting to what the crux of this mRNA vaccine agenda is in Israel?
That's along the legal lines that I personally wouldn't know if there's any plans right now. I know that there have been a laundry list of attempts to try to get the Supreme Court to honor only very belatedly. And actually, it was with what I mentioned last February, when they tried to allow our personal data to be given to local authorities. Only very belatedly did they even stand up in any way. So I don't know of any current FOIAs being attempted. And because the general statement by the Supreme Court is that we can't possibly say yes or no when it comes to the world of medicine and science. Therefore, the Ministry of Health has full ability to do as they wish.
So if I also then understand you correctly, is that the Supreme Court in Israel has made a clear statement, they're not going to get involved. Are you aware of any specific cases that has basically been instituted in the Supreme Court to say, you know what, the government can't say that we don't have an absolute right. The government can't say that we have given informed consent because obviously we don't even know what is contained within these mRNA COVID-19 vaccines. Is there any application that is currently before the Supreme Court that you are aware of?
No.
Or is it just that the lawyers in Israel, in a sense, they've said, you know what, I think this is going to be a losing battle. There's no way that we will even get a hearing in the Supreme Court, which is, I believe, then the highest court in the country.
Again, that's those specifics of what's been tried and what's been shot down. I know that the mask mandates and these type of things, these would really be better questions for people who are involved directly, because a lot of that happened without any news items whatsoever ever touching on it. So, but I know that they made their attempts, and even in one case, that the judge was so annoyed at even having been tried that they made the lawyer pay for the entirety of the both sides of the court proceedings. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much, Alana.
Does that mean, Alana, that in Israel the judiciary doesn't function anymore?
You might be able to say it like that. There was some hope. There have been some rumblings. They were asleep largely for the certainly I'd say for the first year, and I would never even dream of being able to put our hope in it. But they haven't been entirely useless for when it comes to everything that's been brought to them.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you very much. Again, shocking testimony, I must say. In particular, when you see the connection between what Patrick and Matthew told us, and how this seems to be, at least at this point, invisible to a large part of the Israeli population. If it's true that Israel is like the canary in the coal mine, then we should all be extremely careful. And I think it is true because your testimony coincides with what Michael Swinwood, our colleague from Canada, says. Now we're all Indians, or what our friend from Australia said, David Cole. Now we're all Aborigines. It seems like we're all in their sights as targets. And we have to be aware of this. We also have to make this clear to the Israeli people before it's too late. Well, thank you very, very much, Alana.